A beat. In music, it is our basic unit of time. But with only one beat, we have no way of determining its position in time. In other words, we hear a single beat occurring at a particular moment, and then it moves ever onward into the past. To orient ourselves, we play beats cyclically, typically in groups of 4, and repeat them ever onward into the future or until the music meets its appropriate conclusion. With multiple beats, we have a pulse, a regularly repeating event. The amount of these regularly repeating events that occur in the span of 1 minute is called tempo, known as beats per minute. With a high or very high BPM, the tempo feels swift, lively, and animated, and it gives the music a sense of forward momentum. With a moderate BPM, the tempo will feel more relaxed, casual, and centered. A low or very low BPM will feel more broad, solemn, heavy, and sometimes majestic. Regardless of tempo, pulse allows the mind and body to orient itself in time. When listening to music, we may tap our toes, clap our hands, and perhaps most importantly, dance. It is therefore useful to think of pulse as a sort of durational point of reference that can be subdivided into shorter durations or multiplied into longer durations. In this example, the reference point is assigned to quarter notes. Made of 2 parts, it has a note head and a stem. When playing or writing music in a 4-beat cycle, we count quarter notes using Arabic numerals. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4-beat cycle itself is called a measure. At the start of this measure, a time signature is displayed using a top number and a bottom number. The top number represents the number of beats per measure, and the bottom number reveals the note value that gets the beat. For instance, in 4/4 time, there are 4 beats per measure, and the quarter note gets the beat. The bottom number 4 refers to the quarter note. Moving on, any quarter note in this measure can be subdivided into 2 equal and shorter durations called eighth notes, meaning 2 eighth notes equal the duration of 1 quarter note. Eighth notes consist of a note head, stem, and flag, with the flag distinguishing them from quarter notes. If a rhythm is composed of consecutive eighth notes, the flags are beamed together in groups of 2 so that the quarter note pulse is outlined. To count eighth notes, insert the word "an" between the Arabic numerals of the quarter note counting scheme. Make sure that each count is evenly spaced. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. It's very common for the "and" sound to be represented using the "and" sign. But in practice, you don't need to bother carefully articulating the D sound in "and." This could feel quite unnatural and affect your accuracy. In some method books, authors actually prefer to write out the word "and" to avoid confusion. Next, the eighth note itself can be divided into 2 equal parts called sixteenth notes. Sixteenths are given an additional flag to distinguish them from other notes. 2 sixteenths can be played in the time span of an eighth note, and 4 sixteenths in the time span of a quarter note. To outline the quarter note pulse, sixteenths are beamed in groups of 4, as you see here. To count sixteenths, we add the syllables e and to our eighth note counting scheme, with the e's and lying evenly between the eighth note counting scheme. Still, however, we could further divide sixteenths using the same process. This would yield 2 30-second notes for each sixteenth, 4 for each eighth, and 8 for each quarter. You'll notice at this point that as we keep subdividing further and further, the notes will gain a flag. This is a simple technique in rhythmic notation used to organize rhythms in a kind of hierarchy. On a related note, the counting scheme for 30 seconds depends on the context. You can count them using either an eighth or a 16th note counting scheme. When using an eighth note scheme, you'll simply count 1 and 2 and, while playing 4 notes per count. Just make sure that the 4 30 seconds are evenly spaced within each count. This method will work better for a higher tempo range. With a 16th note counting scheme, take a similar approach by counting 1 E and 2 E and while making sure to play 2 evenly spaced notes per count. This method would work better for a slower tempo range. In theory, we can further divide the quarter note into even smaller subdivisions, namely 64, 128, 256, and so on. However, if you've made your way to this video, it's likely that you're in the early stages of your music education, so it's unlikely that you'll see 64th notes on a page of music anytime soon, and these two are very rarely used. That covers the basics of beat subdivision, so let's refer back to our 4/4 measure and discuss beat multiplication. As we know now, dividing the quarter note into 2 halves will yield eighth notes, where 2/8 equal 1/4. But if we double the quarter note, we get half notes. This means that 1/2 will occupy the time span of 2 quarter notes. Half notes are made of 2 parts, a hollow note head and a stem. In a 4/4 measure, half notes sound on beats 1 and 3. Lastly, we can double the length of our half note and yield a whole note. The whole note is made of only one part, a hollow note head. The whole note occupies the time span of 2 half notes or 4 quarter notes. In other words, the whole note occupies the whole duration of a 4/4 measure, hence the term. In fact, each duration we've discussed is named based on how much space they occupy with respect to a whole note. A whole note occupies the whole measure, a half note occupies 1/2, a quarter note occupies 1/4, and so on. It's important to note that durations are always classified with respect to the whole note, regardless of the time signature. For example, 1 quarter note in a 3/4 time signature occupies a third of the measure, but it's still referred to as a quarter note. So as a final summary, a beat is a basic unit of time. When beats are played at regular time intervals, a pulse is produced. A pulse is felt naturally when listening to music. It's a regular tapping of the toes, clapping of the hands, and regularly timed movements of dance. The amount of beats that occur within the span of 1 minute is tempo, also known as BPM. Tempo can vary significantly and invoke different levels of energy, ranging from feelings of solemnity, casualness, heaviness, feelings of brightness, cheerfulness, forward momentum, and relentless propulsion. Beats can both be subdivided into shorter durations and multiplied into longer durations. The name for each duration is defined in relation to the whole note. This process can be summarized using a rhythm tree, starting with the whole note divided into 2 halves, which are then divided into 2 quarters, each quarter divided into eighths, and so on. If you found this helpful, subscribe and stay tuned for upcoming lectures on more advanced topics.